You are listening to Cemetery Confessions, the world's #1 goth talk podcast.
And welcome back to Cemetery Confessions. This episode we are chatting with Alaska's only goth duo, Cliff and Ivy. We'll be hearing their stories from touring around the goth scene in the US, stories from their friendships with deathrock legends like Rikk Agnew, Gitaine demone, and Paul Roessler, along with discussions around dealing with death, being differently abled, and a whole lot more. If you would like to check out their music and related art projects, I highly recommend you give them a listen. You can head over to cliffandivy.com, as well as search for them on Bandcamp and all social media. Or you can just head to our show notes and get the links there. So as always, I am the Count, and I am here with my co-host Trey. Cliff, Ivy, welcome to the show. Why don't we get started here? Let us know how you discovered that you were goth.
I'm Ivy Silence. I've always liked things that were on, kind of like the more mystical, darker side of art and music. Definitely, I was into gothic music in the 80s, early 80s, Susie and the Banshees and Sisters of Mercy and things like that, and very much enjoyed that music. But I feel like goth for me has just been a way I was born, in a way. I was into weird stuff at an early age, and pretty much was called a witch from the very beginning. So that's a little bit about me.
Oh, wow.
Aren't you going to mention that you were related to the ladies, or one of the ladies that was, in
Yeah,
the witch trials in Salem, Massachusetts?
yeah,
Oh, from
yeah.
Salem.
I mean, I've put it on Facebook before, but recently my mother passed, and I went on Ancestry.com and did our ancestry because there were some mysteries there, and it turns out that that we're related through her. I'm related through her to Rebecca Nurse and her family, and those are folks that were executed in Salem. So I haven't been to Salem, and I want to go in order to see this history and
Yeah.
experience it. But yeah, so it was an interesting discovery. I wish I could have known that before she passed, because I know she would have really loved to know that too. So I kind of got that weird stuff from her. So she was great.
Did you was your mom or anyone in your family into that paganism or spirituality in that way? Anything
Yeah,
like
I
that?
think my mom was into that, not overtly, but she was really into psychics and
Mhm.
astrology, but yet she
Mm.
had, normal religion on the outside, because that was back in the day. I don't think people really accepted that, but she would do all kinds of different things in that way. So yeah.
Wasn't your mom always reading like Stephen King and Anne Rice books back in the 70s? Like,
Oh yes.
you did like a
Nice.
school book report about Interview with a Vampire when you were like 10 years old or something.
Yeah, I did. I had the book from my mom, and I
That's
did a book
amazing.
report. I still have it, and the teacher was absolutely disgusted by it. So
Oh, wow. I was gonna say, I bet the teacher didn't
oh no,
appreciate
she was
that.
just
Yeah.
disgusted by it. Yeah, she had to give me a good grade because it was good, but she wrote, "This is disgusting" all over it.
And you had a very bizarre
Wow.
childhood, because like your dad was a kind of like a, what do you call that, like a, oh, where they
Forensic psychiatrist.
yeah, like a
So
like a profiler.
Ah.
Back in
yeah,
the 70s, he was doing that, and he worked with like Son of Sam case and stuff like that.
he was a consultant.
Oh, that's
Yeah,
wild.
he rose pretty high in the military and made a career in forensic psychiatry, which is where you develop the defense of the criminally insane, which was the term, I guess, back in the day. So he ended up working with Son of Sam case and a couple other of the famous cases as a consultant, so he could develop profiles or help develop a profile with the team. So he was always into odd stuff too. And most of the books that I had as a kid, because you have to be an MD before you're a psychiatrist. So we had shelves and shelves of all these
Mm.
medical books and every kind of procedure you could think of, like how to do these operations and what it looked like and what bodies look like. And of course, I'm a pretty big reader, so I just would take all those books and just go through them, and all the psychiatry books about aberrant behavior and aggression and things like that. Just ate
Mm.
them up.
Me, me personally, I kind of just got into like darker stuff as a kid, just growing up in New Jersey, and listening to all the rock and roll music that was happening, and my parents were into like marching band music and jazz and just this kind of weird like stuff. And I remember my mom, she was, I don't know if you know what the PTA is. It's like the thing that they like, kind of like an organization for the parents of the children in school and stuff. Well, anyway, one year
Hmm.
she was in charge of like doing this fundraiser, so she ended up getting a Dracula movie. I think it was like Dracula Prince of Darkness, like a Hammer film, for like in the 70s, and it was like really scary, right? And they had
Yeah.
it had a lot of like risque kind of like like because the British sensibility is a little more, they have a little more just a little more cheeky, and so it was kind of risque, and it had like gore, and it was pretty wild. And I remember being very scared by Christopher Lee, and the music in those films was really like influenced me a lot. And I guess the first time I heard Black Sabbath, that really scared the life out of me. I went running out of the room the first time I heard like Electric Funeral or whatever. um, and that feeling of dread, and so that kind of started me off. And then once I heard the Ramones and like the 70s punk bands, Devo and the Ramones, and then got more into like Killing Joke and Susie and the Banshees and stuff, then
Mm.
I really got drawn into more of the goth post punk scene. And really loved Killing Joke a lot. I really obsessed with Killing Joke for years and years, and ended up becoming like a roadie. And you know, it, they're like, just love their music, and just there's so many great bands, So you kind of like pick up on different bands over the years. And yeah. And Ivy, I met Ivy when she was going to school in New Jersey, and in 1984. So we met at the Clash concert in 1984, and at Rutgers College, and in Jersey, and New Brunswick. And so we've been playing music since then together. So
Yeah, that was when you had to actually go to a store and pick an album based on the cover and hope that it was good, or if you already knew who the band was.
Definitely.
Uh, yeah, for sure. It's funny too. I just read yesterday. I was reading about Hammer horror films, and they were saying that the sort of heaving bosoms of those movies were not necessarily meant to be sexual, but more like a camp version of the idealized Victorian England corsetry and that kind of thing. But when you watch it back now, it has a whole different context to it. But um, very cool. So, as I'm as I'm sure I mentioned in the introduction, you both are currently in Alaska. And when a lot of people think about Alaska, they tend to think about, especially if you're alternative, probably being in an isolated sort of position. And I know a lot of our listeners are living in small towns or maybe bigger towns, but struggle with anxiety, and so they don't necessarily go out and socialize with people. Um, so I was curious if that's the situation for you, and if it is, how do you um, enjoy and find comfort in your identity and what you're into without having that in-person community?
Yeah, we've been here since 93. So it's been quite a
Mm.
while, and we went from a populated area to a not so much populated area. So, you know, I would say for myself, I definitely felt different and not isolated, but I guess isolated in my thoughts and my inner turmoil or whatever, amongst many people or amongst few. But here in Alaska,
Mm.
um, we can identify things that are goth, or at least I can identify things that are goth to me, just right there in nature, just the existence of darkness for most of the year. all the cool nighttime animals like wolves and owls, ravens. They're nighttime only, but you see a lot of those, and a lot of the culture here of original people, our Alaska Native people. You can learn about culture, and in this culture, there's a lot of depictions of, I guess, folks from the other side or entities from the other side, sometimes
Mm,
malevolent, sometimes benevolent, and you just kind of get immersed in these things where it's just right there, just right there in people's stories and
yeah.
people's faces, and you can see these animals. So, and you really have to make your own way. In the 90s, we did have more clubs, I guess, than we have now. So some of the clubs did, industrial music and um, goth and industrial, mostly on the industrial side. So we did a lot of experimental things. We did experimental theater. Made music for theater. We did noise music for a while. We worked closely with a community theater company, which did kind of new plays that were different and involved hand-built instruments that made noises that you couldn't hear anywhere else. We would put on our own performance art and just get people to take a look at that and decide what they thought about it. We made our own group of people, and then we also were involved in the early phases of the body piercing scene here, like the body modification people.
Oh,
So we would end up, because we knew everybody was an underground person, underground artist or outsider
mm,
or whatever in this town. We would end up being the ones that would come and play for body piercing slash modification rituals like the hanging and the hook, the hook
yeah.
tearing and things like that. So, and that was real different and odd back then. It was not, some people had these parties in their backyard, and they did the best they could.
Yep.
So, it's kind of make your own scene, I think. We've been more embraced in recent years by the drag community here, and the drag community is
Mm,
very strong. There's new people and young people in that know what goth is, and they adopt, like a goth persona. So I definitely have to put a shout out to our drag and burlesque community for being goth and just being super proud and being encouraging of us and our music and support it. What about
Yeah,
you, Cliff?
Mad Myrna's. This is like the happening club that's here in Anchorage. And they have a drag night, like 1 or 2 nights a week, and Ivy's actually involved in that community pretty heavily. Um, what's
Yeah,
you actually? She actually has a title.
yeah, I have a title. I was in a contest where a pageant, which was the first pageant I ever did. So I sang a song, and I sang "Letter to Daddy" from Help Me, Cliff, the with the movie. I've written a letter to Daddy, and so I actually won it. I didn't expect to win at all, but I got the title "Nightmare of Anchorage." So, with yeah,
That's
this is the first
awesome.
one ever.
We played a lot of punk rock clubs and heavy metal and industrial, and we DJ'd. We did lots of DJing up in here. I DJ'd on the radio, and we did like parties and just all
Nice.
kinds of stuff. I DJ'd for like 20 plus years, like at at a rec center with disabled adults that experience developmental disabilities, and
Mm,
that was
hmm.
amazing. I did like over 200 parties there, and it was everybody just really goes wild, and it was just really a different experience than going to like a rock club and DJing there, because at the disabled folks community center, like everybody get up and dance. It wasn't just like a few people. It was like
Right.
so that was incredible. We would play. We had a band called Parallax One at the time, and we're talking about the '90s, and so we would play like the North by Northwest Festival in Portland in 1998, and
Mm.
we just did all this different stuff. We came to New Jersey, and the drummer of Ween produced our first CD for that group, and Claude Coleman, and we were just trying to connect with different folks, and did a bunch of remixes and tribute tracks for Martin Atkins's label, Invisible Records, and um, all that kind of stuff. Just cool, cool stuff.
Well, so then speaking of touring, that's one of the things one of the questions I always am interested to hear about perspectives from people that are able to or have at least visited multiple scenes and venues in different places is, I don't know how much time you in practicality get to spend with the people that are coming to see your shows, but um do you feel like there's any kind of major differences from place to place, or do you feel like the community is pretty consistent and similar wherever you go?
I think they're really different. We do the best we can to play in different places. So mostly we played in LA, Portland, and we played in Oakland, uh, Las Vegas, like West Coast,
Joshua Tree.
Joshua Tree,
Yeah,
Desert. And we've
Mm,
played on the East Coast. We have yet to make it to the Midwest, which I do want to do. But I think,
yeah, Chicago and Detroit. You got to get out there.
yeah, I think the West,
Wisconsin.
yeah, totally. The West Coast is a lot more, kind of lenient, and they're more hip, and everything's casual. They're a lot more
mm.
enthusiastic. We did play in Austin, and I have to say that Austin had the most enthusiastic, or actually San Antonio had the most enthusiastic scene that we've had.
That was crazy.
It's like
Yeah, it was
Wow.
great.
that scene is off the hook there. So we had a really good time.
Huh.
And on the East Coast, it's a little bit more conservative, which is, we know that because we're from there too. So there's a
I don't
lot
know.
of,
It's hard to say. Maybe we just haven't played the right parties yet. We're still developing this particular group, and we've been playing as Cliff and Ivy. I mean, we literally been playing in bands together since 1984, but all different kinds of bands.
That's
But
wild.
we this started this group in 2011. I'm gonna say 2011 was our first like kind of incarnation as Cliff and Ivy, and then it's kind of just grown from there. We worked with Don Bowles from the Germs, Kramer from the Butthole Surfers. We worked with Rikk Agnew and gitaine demone from Christian Death, and Paul Roessler produced us like a bunch of records with us, and we just done a lot of different stuff. We went down to LA to record a bunch of stuff with Paul's studio, Kit and Robot, and the LA scene is really cool. Orange County, you got there's a bunch of different scenes there. Um, and then the East Coast has been really cool too. Like we played in Jersey, we played in what else? We did Baltimore and Virginia. That was really fun. Got to meet like people that we never met before, and played places that were different. So we're definitely looking forward to doing more. Uh, this I guess what next month we're coming down to New Jersey, New York, and maybe some other dates, but we're still like trying to put that together.
yeah, the scenes, I would say no matter where we are, there's always a dedicated scene, even if it's a small one. It's super dedicated. I don't know. I mean, my perception of West Coast versus East Coast is really just kind of, West Coast is kind of like
Mm,
everything goes. And then East Coast is like kind of, I guess, more maybe isolated from each other, the different scenes. So there's different ways to be in
mm,
different areas. Like you gotta, this is the way it is here, and this is the way it is here. But everyone's been super welcoming, and we're super excited to, meet more people and play places that we haven't played before. And,
Well,
that's
we
a goal.
we kind of we kind of play on this fine line between old school punk rock and goth and death rock. So we're kind of like we kind of go between scenes, like we could play like a like a dive bar and play some rock and roll punk type stuff, and then we could flip it and play some kind of like more dancier type, you know gothic type sounding stuff,
Yeah, we've
so
played in.
we kind of go a lot of different areas, so it's kind of like hard to say
mm,
between what club is better. I think it's just a matter of like connecting with people, and just seeing the
mm,
similarities and the different flavors that I love about different places, playing in different areas. Like we played in Portland, and that was so much fun too, so we had a
Yeah.
great time there. Yeah.
Speaking of seeing things like the connectedness of people and experiencing that in different scenes, how do you think that dynamic shifts when you're in say like a smaller scene like your description of Anchorage or in some of the other places you've been to, where the dynamic is more everybody kind of knows each other, there isn't really a lot of strangers, it's very close knit, a lot of DIY stuff with, like you were saying, house parties, versus some of these bigger cities where you've got a very large scene and bunch of maybe cliques of people who know one another, but don't really know other people who maybe still going to the same events. What's your take on that sort of dynamic, or what was your perception of that?
Yeah, I like both of those things, and we played we played bigger parties and kind of like more like exclusive kind of shows, and also just like really DIY shows that were like, who put this together and how's it gonna work? Is the PA gonna work? That kind of stuff. You're always kind of like,
Mhm.
I mean, we're gonna play next month. We're gonna play in a record store in South Jersey. You know what I mean? Just like, I'm hoping it all works, it all works together, but it should be fun. We're excited to meet people and people to hear our music. And, it's kind of what we do. It's like we go to our day jobs and we do that stuff. And then we come home and we're like, we still have this passion for it after all this years to like play music for people and engage with other people about kind of like different stuff. We have a different way of songwriting too, but I think we'll explain
Yeah.
that here.
Yeah, my perception of the different scenes is really, I mean, like Cliff says, we can fit in anywhere. We've played in a clothing shop, we played in a coffee shop, we played in a, club, big club, whatever. The
That was a great show actually. We played in a clothing shop in LA, and that was like she just moved all the clothes back and put a PA up, and we were
It
off.
was awesome.
We
Yeah.
played as a duo. It's like guitar, vocals, and backing tracks, and that's how we do it live. So
Yeah. The difference between the scenes, though, I mean, coming from Alaska, I guess my best thought on that is that being able to reach out and find the person who's the friendly, find someone who's willing to take the time to listen to you and, get a rapport with them, usually online. We've been able to work the internet a whole lot around that. And whether the scene is big or small, if you can find the person that's your person to connect with, then that's the door in. And then when you get to that scene, you're seen with them, other people see you with them, and they're like, oh, you're with them. Okay, it's cool, And that's how you just have
Mm-hmm.
to find the
Yeah.
friendly. That's my, the friendly person is what I'm trying to say.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's funny that you brought up Don Bowles. Just real quick, it reminded me because I've been reading that book, Phantoms. What is it? The Rise of L.A. Deathrock, or The Rise of Deathrock.
yeah,
And there's in the early chapter of that book, there's a story about how he got kicked out of the Germs because he was in an experimental band at the time.
Vox Pop.
Where, yeah, that's it. And he said that they opened for the Germs one time, and he was on stage in like a pink dress with a wig and glitter, and ended up half naked through the show.
That's Don.
And at the end, at the end of the event, whoever the lead singer of the Germs is, I don't
Derby
remember,
Crash.
came up and he was like, "Yeah, you can't be in the band anymore,"
Yeah.
which is pretty cool,
Yeah.
pretty punk rock.
Don's out there. He's a great performer. We love Don. He came up to visit us here in Alaska, and we played up here, and we brought
We
Gitaine
toured
and
with
Rikk and
him.
Paul Roessler up here. Yep. Yeah, we had Don play a bunch of West Coast shows. It's a long story, but our Alaskan drummer got injured, and so we ended up having Don play with us, and he agreed.
Oh,
And
that's cool.
yeah, we played some shows in LA with Don, and then our East Coast drummer bailed on us, so we had a bunch of shows booked to the East Coast. We flew Don out, and he played us, played with the shows. He knew the set, so we just did it. It was great.
And he was perfect. He was so funny. He just kept us laughing and happy the whole time. And he's excellent
Mhm.
taste in music and just, fun person to hang out with. And, you know, ended up staying at that we have family that lives there. So we learned that he really likes to wash
Mhm.
the dishes.
No, he
So
stole my mom's steak knife. She wants it back, Don. He stayed in my childhood bedroom. Actually, it's really funny.
Oh
yeah.
wow,
Yeah, it was so weird.
that's hilarious.
Don Bowles is sleeping in my the bedroom I grew up in. That was really weird.
One last quick tour question. I'm just curious, having, you have to eat at some point. Do you get weird stares or treatment from outside of your hometown when you're on tour?
Always.
Yeah. And we get them,
Yeah.
when we're here. Like,
We're just weird
Oh,
anyway.
okay.
We're just weird anyway, even if we don't
yeah.
put on makeup or whatever. I mean,
Sure.
they follow us around. The store security always follows us around anyway.
It doesn't matter what we look like. It just, we clear a room and, the different places we go. We've done everything we need to do, but people always stare at us.
Usually it's about 10 or 15 minutes. We can clear a restaurant usually.
Yeah. People get a little uncomfortable when we're there, and they're like, "We're out of here."
Beautiful. Well, one of the things that we do have in common, one of the other things we have in common is kids. And I wanted to kind of get your perspective on that a little bit and see, if you feel like you have more of a unique challenge being a goth and a parent, kind of, with school and with taking care of them and trying to still remain involved in the community and that kind of thing.
Oh, yeah, that's been quite the adventure. We, had to kind of not be as so active when they were young. Of course, it takes you out for a while, when they're little, but as they grew, I mean, we have said it in on social media and stuff that we do have two boys. They both experience autism. So we kind of knew early on about that and tried to get them, the correct kind of schooling and the other kind of supports and interventions. So ended up being super busy with different speech therapy and day job and things like that. And um, having our kids, though, has so much added to our creativity in a couple of different ways. But the first way I think about it is discipline. Like, we only have a certain amount of time in order to create quality product. So we train ourselves to be super disciplined in like what we bring to the table together. So we don't it's definitely not the life where it's like, "Oh, I'm gonna run around and maybe have an idea, or sit down and write in my journal until something
Right.
comes to me." You have to have that time. And, we have, like we said before, there's people who come and support our kids while we're home sometimes so that we can
Mm.
play and do the music. And
Oh,
that's
we're lucky to have that. We
yeah,
didn't
yeah,
have that.
totally.
Like years ago, we didn't have that. We waited about 10 years ago to get like steady support,
Yeah. They
Yeah.
were
Mm.
we fully waited about 10 years before there was any supports, but prior to that we would just pay private folks to watch them, so that we could
Mm.
have a couple hours here and there. So it's the discipline thing, and the other part is just sheer creativity, because we're with people who these young people who they're ours, they're literally ours, who think completely differently, and they interpret the world differently. They make different ways of communication. They don't use
Mm.
words to talk, but we can spend a lot of time with them and learn from them and see how they communicate and just be able to incorporate that into our music. They have been in our music videos. They've been doing backup vocals for our music and like wolf howls and things like that.
Mm.
So it just really has added, but I'm not going to say it's been, super easy. Like I said, it's like a lot of fighting just to get your own time, to be able to
Yeah.
to do that. But it's okay. It's our unique life, you know. So
You mentioned that they participate in your music. Do they also get into like, the movies or other things that you're into, like kind of goth stuff, or they just kind of do their own thing?
Oh yeah, completely. I mean, they're obsessed with all kinds of stuff like They love Disney. So like
Mm.
Fantasia, they're really into music, Fantasia,
Oh yeah,
and
Nightmare
also
Before Christmas.
Fantasia's great.
yeah,
Nightmare Before Christmas is great.
beautiful stuff.
Yeah.
But they really used to steal all of our DVDs, and so they would get like Devo and punk rock stuff, and they were all into that. And for years and years, they were just like, our youngest son is obsessed with Devo. He actually has like a energy dome that he puts on,
Yeah.
and he loves that.
Nice.
Yeah, completely obsessed with some certain musics.
Has he seen any of the short-lived Kid Devo cover band?
Yeah,
Devo
we
2.0?
had him. Yeah, yeah, we showed him that. And then one time we took him to Disney and they actually had a Devo cover band at Disney, and he just about lost it because it
Nice.
Wow.
was so funny. And they don't, like I said, I guess you would label them nonverbal, but
Mm.
90% of our communication's nonverbal anyway, so they're really good at communicating
Mm.
nonverbally, but there are a few words that come out once in a while. Even though we've had like a ton of speech therapy, they really just say a few words with their mouth. But our younger son, he says Halloween. So that goes to show you,
Fantastic.
everything they like is the same as us. They'll steal stuff that's ours and look at it or listen to it. Very much
Aw.
attracted to punk rock and anything that looks goth or punk rock with bats on it or vampires on it. They just gravitate to it just because that's just the way they were raised, I guess. So yeah, yeah, they're great kids. It just definitely adds to our world. It adds a whole nother
Mm.
level to trying to prepare for tour and things like that. But we just try to we do the best we can, and we're just lucky to have such supports that we do have at this time, and just kind of build that. We've built that over the years, so feel fortunate about that.
So what about the other way around then? If kind of talking about um, when you are involved with other goths, do you find that the goth community is understanding and supportive of living with disabilities, or like more so than other communities outside of goth, or do you find there's not a lot of representation or
We're
accessibility and that kind of thing?
we're definitely like involved with the disabled community, and we have disabilities ourselves. We have I have dyslexia, and my wife she has synesthesia.
Mhm.
So we actually use that as part of what we do.
Yeah, and I feel that the goth community is definitely accepting of different ways of perception, in my opinion, much more so than other communities that I like the music of and that I've been, involved with. That it's just not, it's more about the projection, like projecting your ego into the scene. And I guess there's
Mhm.
that in goth too, but I've just seen so many more different people. I've definitely met people who I think are on the spectrum, but super high functioning, and sometimes they say so and sometimes they don't. But for whatever
Mhm.
reason, I can definitely relate, and I think that it's just a lot more accepting. You can be as different as you want to be. You can
Why
make
why don't you
yourself up.
explain the concept
Mhm.
of othering? Because I feel like a lot of people that are in the goth scene are that's a big tie-in between the music and the way you feel,
Mhm.
and then the way other people have you know treated you. Othering,
Mhm.
the concept of that. Could you
Yeah,
explain that?
yeah. Well, that's just where we get labeled by others in society, and it's just the perception of there's a normative group that does things
Mhm.
one way, and they call out another group who does things another way, and it's not just one group,
Mhm.
but it could be a myriad of groups, and therefore, exclude them from all of the privileges and rights of that group that thinks it's the normative one. And othering occurs in the world of disability. You
Mhm.
can tell that we've had our kids for, of course, many years, but I also have a brother, a younger brother, who grew up in our family home. He has intellectual developmental disability. So I really haven't had any time in my life, except for prior to age 3, that I didn't have somebody super close to me with a significant
Mhm.
disability. So the othering and the staring and the um, non-acceptance and the world of the special, where everything has to be special and therapeutic, and all of that stuff is just othering discourse. And true inclusion exists in some places. I believe that inclusion does exist in the goth community. To me, it's kind of like the holy grail. When I see it happen,
Mhm.
it makes my heart, really, really happy. And I it's just another reason why I gravitate to that, and, you know
I think a lot of it's like also nonverbal too. There's a lot of cohesion that's nonverbal, where because that I think maybe that some of that autism and also that othering kind of makes you be sort of more prone to like being a visual learner and being
Mhm.
like an autistic in that way, in that sense,
Mhm.
where you're picking up on visual things and the way you feel, so you're kind of like more maybe attuned to your psychic nature. And I feel like that's kind of
Mhm.
tied into all that. So you're nonverbal, visual learner, and
Uh-huh.
it kind of heightens your intuitive and telepathic abilities. And I feel like
Yeah.
all that, and we're musicians and
Mhm.
artists. Like Ivy's fine arts major, you know.
Yeah, this
You know?
stuff all goes back to, I mean, in goth, you express yourself, and it comes down to it could be your mannerisms, it could be of course, your music and your vocals and your way of dress and your makeup and all that stuff. It's very, very, very visual. and it's got its own library of things that it communicates. But to me, it's just like art grounded in, going back to silent films and the actual Bauhaus art movement and things like that, where, you can see the roots of what we have now, and it just comes out as another art wave to me, and it just keeps going. I like that the scene is kind
Mm.
of new again, and there's, younger
Mm.
folks who are into it, and it seems to just evolve and grow, and, it just becomes a real inclusive space, which I enjoy.
Well, I loved originally, like the punk scene. I thought was very much like the goth, and deathrock and all that was, it was punk, and I think all that stuff was from the glam and the punk scene, and once it started getting like once punk rock started getting very like kind of more like the people that you hated in high school that you beat you up in high school became punks, then that's when it started to not be good. But it kind of became like the jocks from the football team would come and beat everyone up. Then I think then there was definitely a separation between like what was punk and what turned into like hardcore. But not to say I don't like
Mm.
hardcore, but you know what I mean. I'm just saying it's like there's definitely like there was a separation there. Yeah.
Yeah, I do think that goth is. Oop, I bumped my desk. Goth does have that element of dramaticism and performance, and that visual aspect, like you were saying,
Mm-hmm.
is kind of tied into the music and the culture.
Totally. It's
And
also
go ahead.
sorry, it's also more gender inclusive, I think. And I don't just mean
Mm.
binary gender, like all gender inclusive, the
Mm.
goth scene. So, it's another visual lexicon, and lifestyle lexicon and
And storytelling.
storytelling. Yeah. So go ahead. Sorry.
Mm. Yeah, where was I? Oh, yeah. I was trying to recall. We had someone on a previous show that also had synesthesia, and was on the spectrum, and she was talking about how, well, synesthesia is visual, but she was talking about certain fabrics, touching certain fabrics had like brought about specific emotions and feelings and visualizations. And I think like for me, I don't necessarily experience it in that way, but as being kind of a pagan and having meaningful experiences with visuals and objects and in metaphorical senses and that kind of thing, I'd like that. I feel like that's built into my experience as a goth as well, and it all kind of comes together in that way.
There's a lot of different ways people experience synesthesia. From what I understand, there's, some people see floating numbers. Some people taste colors, like they'll look at a painting and have like a
Mm,
taste, And so
yeah.
some people, like, I mean, Ivy, she has synesthesia. You can explain it if you like or whatever. How do you use synesthesia in our music?
A lot of it is just songwriting. I can associate notes with colors. Notes have certain colors, and also words. Words and letters have colors. So that's where I get the lyrics, and I
Mm,
can kind of feel words on a page. I can write them, and I can feel the colors that they are giving me in my mind, and then I
mm-hmm.
make lyrics according to the pattern and the picture that they form in, of course, in my mind. And so that's how we incorporate that. And sometimes I put it together with just storytelling and characterization and other elements of, writing and poetry and stuff like that. And sometimes it's just pure synesthesia lyrics and kind of sound like they're there by chance, but then they have meaning.
Mm,
One of the things that folks have mentioned to me about our lyrics is like, you can interpret it to be a certain way, any which way, and people have come up with all kinds of stuff. It's a post-apocalyptic story. They just really, really dig on the lyrics. So
mm.
that's been real fun and interesting.
That is incredible. Yeah, actually, that reminds me of Trey and I were having a conversation. What was this? A couple nights ago at Nocturna with someone. And she had been working. She was doing a nursing program, and she was working in a prison. Talking, not get a little bit sad here, but talking with inmates and seeing the way that the medical community had labeled them as a problem. Where so basically, she was having these conversations with people. They were telling her how they would have these experiences, they would see things, they would hear things,
Mhm.
and they got labeled as, oh, they have schizophrenia,
Yeah.
or they have multiple personality disorder, and this is something that needs to be fixed. But she was telling me that, she was like, I'm talking to these people and they're telling me the same experiences that I have, but because I didn't, I grew up in a different community, I didn't have my experiences stigmatized in that way. They were more for me spiritual.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I was able to have that privilege of, um, being able to exist in the world in that way and have those
Right.
experiences. Whereas, unfortunately, people who aren't privileged like that do get stigmatized and put into these kind of shitty boxes.
Right. I would agree. We're lucky to be where we're at. We're lucky, if you're talking about it and doing it and being creative, then, you're apex, person. You're,
Mm.
there's just a lot of folks that are left out of that story who have all very, very valid stories. And I mean, we're just with the disability thing for us, we had to do like a lot of learning and solving problems and learning how to respond to communication that's completely different. So for us to
Mm.
to encounter people that, you know, would come up through systems like that, I wouldn't necessarily I would just listen to them and see, well, what are they trying to say with
Mm.
that? Because instead of, oh, they're ill, here, if we're done,
Well, I mean, first of all,
Mm-hmm.
like behavior is a form of communication. So people are trying to tell you something, something's going on, and so it's good to like teach people, sign language, and learn to communicate in different ways. Use technology to communicate if they're like nonverbal. So you can communicate with words, you can communicate with sign language, or with the computer. They have speech devices and all that on your iPad. Even you can get your phone to use it to make words.
Mm. I guess you kind of spoke to this a little bit. I just wanted to double check if you had any other advice, but mostly out of selfish reasons, but because a lot of people in on our Discord, for example, deal with having a lot of responsibilities and things they have to do, but still wanting to express their creativity and nurture that side of themselves while having very little time and energy. You kind of talked about maybe how you two handle that with making schedules and that kind of thing.
Yeah, definitely. We just decided what nights we were going to request um staffing for our kids so that we could be
Mm.
creative. So we sat down and we said, well, it's going to be these certain nights. And then on those nights, we're going to work. And we have a
Mm.
number of, we have like maybe 3 hours for 3 nights that we're going to work. On this night, we're going to do this. The next night, we're going to do that. And then we just approach it that way. If you don't get the song when you thought you were going to get the song, or if you don't get the lyrics when you thought you were going to get the lyrics, don't worry about it. Just go to the next time that you've set
Mm.
aside to do it, and it'll all get done. I do a lot of
Mm.
kind of micro creativity things. Like if I'm at work, I have a book where I can write in. I can write a reflection in it. I give myself maybe 5 minutes and I say, you have to write something, just write anything, whatever comes to you, just write anything, even if you're just complaining about whatever happened to you just now. You have to just, it's like a muscle. You have to try it, even if you don't like what came out, and then eventually
Mm.
you'll get used to it, and it becomes a habit, and then
Mm.
you're really on it, and you'll keep going from there.
Yeah, that's the kind of advice I've
So
heard from a
yeah.
lot of people in, that use creativity as more of an occupation than just sort of an idle thing to do when you're amused, is that you do have to have the practice of doing the work, whether it's writing, whether it's composing music. You need to do the practice of doing the work, even if you're not necessarily creating the ideal thing that you want. Your vision might not be coming through because you aren't inspired at the moment. You still need to take the time to go
Mhm.
through the practice of creating. And that, just like you said, it's like a muscle. You're working that muscle. And then when things come together and creativity happens, you're all ready and prepped for it, rather than being blindsided by
Mm.
having this sudden flash of insight and trying to quickly translate that into some creative outlet that you can then present to the world.
Yeah. One of the things I think that's helped us, and we end up making music that's always out there, like super, people are just scratching their heads, like especially with our experimental music and things like that. Um, we like to take music that we like as an inspiration and then try to make something that sounds like that but isn't that. And so the thing that's unique about us is that whatever we make never ever sounds like what we started with, or we give ourselves an
Hmm.
assignment that's completely different. Like, what would it sound like if we made a song that was a sports anthem? Like something completely opposite,
Okay.
Well, right now.
Huh.
We're working on a country song,
Exactly.
a country
So
goth song. It's
Wow.
for this compilation that's coming up. We're doing.
Huh.
yeah,
Okay.
so we have
All right.
we're working on a
Working on
a
a couple of
dark
compilations
western.
right now.
So, but it's been fun because, we're needing to come up with a character and describe that because, a lot of the country songs are storytelling and oftentimes they're tragic stories.
Mm.
I was telling
Mhm.
Cliff last night, if you just take the music away and look at the words just themselves, it's goth. Like, not everyone, not, the other stories, but the sad
Well, like
stories of
the blues are
loss.
goth. The blues
The
are goth.
blues, yeah.
They are.
Yeah.
So, yeah, if you take an opposite, sometimes that kind of fixes your slump and gets you going, and then you get something going so you can practice. And you can, even if you don't like what you came out with, at least you did it. So,
Kind of staying on that then, because I did want to ask about how cool it was that you got to work with Rikk Agnew and Gitaine demone. Was that a process where you were writing music together, or were they playing parts that you had written already, or what was that experience like?
Cliff.
Well, both. I mean, we it's a long story. Let's see. Well,
I got time.
we got to go to work at Kitten Robot Studio with Paul Roessler, and he's an amazing keyboard player and producer. And he has a studio in Los Angeles called Kitten Robot, and he played with the Screamers and 45 Grave,
Mm.
and Don plays in a. I'm sorry, Don played in 45 Grave as well. We were friends with him, um, and we also um, Paul Paul Roessler. He is in a band called the Gitaine demone Quartet, and so he
Hmm.
plays regularly with Gitaine and Rikk and Deb Venom, and we have some other friends in LA that we play with. Skyly Viggs, a really great guy. PJ Franco as well. And anyway, so so Paul Roessler and Gitaine and Rikk, they're all kind of they work together quite often. So we just were like, hey, you guys want to come do some tracks? We had a few tracks that we had written, songs we had written, and we brought those down to LA, and then I can't remember, the first one we did was like a double album set. It was like it would be like a, I don't know, it's like 80 minute uh
Oh wow.
like CD. I don't know, it was like really full. But
CXI 111.
yeah, I think that was our first one with them, right? Wasn't that?
Yeah,
And
and they would come and just collaborate with us. In some cases, we had music, like the core of the music ready, and then some of the things are just straight up jams. Like
yeah,
nothing
total
was
improv.
decided ahead.
Nice.
We just
100%.
hit record, and like we had, I don't know, I can't remember, we had kind of jammed on one piece, and then we just kept recording it, so it was literally like 20 something minutes long.
Yeah, there's a
And
20-minute song that came out of it
it
with
was
like a
crazy.
story in the middle of
Wow.
it and all this
Yeah,
stuff. And Jatan would do the singing and she would learn, she would just take the parts that I sang and just form her vocals around that.
she would
And
freestyle on
it's
stuff, and
great. Yeah.
Ivy she would have like a big long list of words in front of her, and she would actually like freestyle these synesthesia words into sentences. So it kind of just really literally freestyling synesthesia words, and kind of
Hmm.
it was just, it really came together. And then we had some jam songs like that were total improv songs that just literally just were like, we just started playing, and we all put it together, and that's what you hear. A little bit of polish on it. Paul Roessler's great. He does that post production stuff, but also we also had like songs that we wrote that were um, some of them were like post punk, some of them were straight up like punk rock, some of them were um, just real dark kind of songs, And some of them, had more just different flavors. But these guys, we brought them down there, and Rikk immediately started coming up with riffs, and Gitaine was freestyling, and Paul was just an amazing keyboard player, and uh, Deb Venom, she's a great keyboard player and bass player. I played most of the bass on, I think, every Cliff and Ivy song except for one that was produced by Deb Venom at her studio. But everything else I played bass on, all the Cliff and Ivy songs, and I played guitar on most of them, and except when Rikk was in the studio. And sometimes if it was just me and him, I would play the bass and he would play guitar. But I played guitar on most of this stuff. And live, I play guitar and all this stuff at live. But um, anyway, yeah, that's pretty much it. I mean, we went in the studio, so we kept going back to visit those guys, and we would play shows down in L.A. and Orange County and Anaheim or whatever, and we would go play gigs, and then we'd go down for like a week or two, and then go in the studio and record for 3 or 4 days, and come out with a new album like in 3 or 4 days. It was crazy. So we would record some things here in our studio, and then we would go to LA and bring the tracks, and they would finish them there, or we would just add to whatever needed to be done. And it was just crazy. So Paul really put a lot of effort into it and helped us out. And so we ended up doing CXI 111 with Paul. We did Spirit Room,
Yes.
and we did American Saints, which is like a punk rock cover album,
Tribute
album. Yeah. And that's got Rikk and Paul and Ivy and myself and Skyly Vague and PJ Franco. And then we also did just recently. I think was it last year, we went down and recorded the EP. It was with Paul, but I think it was just the three of us. It was Ivy, myself, and Paul, and we recorded the Death Mass Devotion, which we had songs like Ohm and Exhibit.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
Yeah, I was fairly terrified when I first started working with them, just because I was like, oh my God, I just saw that keyboard that says Nina Hagen Band on it. Now I'm gonna shit my pants because I'm the singer.
No, I mean, Paul Roessler played keyboard on like some of the best Nina Hagen stuff that was ever, the Nunsex Monk Rock record. He totally was all over that, It was great. And he toured with Nina Hagen, and Paul's amazing. We love Paul. He's
it ended up being fine,
so it's funny, like Paul actually went to high school with Darby Crash and who is it? Pat Smear from the Germs. Later went on to Nirvana and the Foo Fighters and all that. But all these guys, they all know each other from high school and stuff. So it's just funny. These guys are just like rock, they're like rock royalty, punk rock royalty, and goth and death rock royalty. And we're just really honored to be able to work with Rikk and Gitaine and Paul and all the nice folks that we work with. And on the East Coast, we have friends, people I work with since I was in high school. Brian Troisi, he's a great friend of ours. He plays drums on some of our tracks, and he'll mail the tracks to us over the internet. And this is we just do stuff like that. We can do tracks here at our studio, but if you can work with somebody from the East Coast or the West Coast or whatever, why not? So it's fun to experiment and just come out with something that is different than what you would have just done by yourself. Trying to reach out to other people.
Yeah.
It is. Go ahead.
Oh, we had it was interesting. We had the opportunity to have Gitaine Demone Quartet come up to Alaska and do some gigs here. And they came up and stayed at our place, and we took care of them and put shows together. We had an all ages show that we put together in like an art space. There was basically a Quonset hut, which I think is haunted, but that's a whole nother story. But a Quonset hut, and we had this show, and there was not that many people there, but who was there they totally knew who Rikk was, and they totally wanted his autograph, and they just couldn't believe it. And then but we went up to Fairbanks, which is a plane ride away. I'm like, okay, the next gig we're going to get on the plane and go to. So we went up to Fairbanks and we played in one of the college bars there. it's an extremely enthusiastic audience, very tight knit and very welcoming, and just kind of Wild West artsy, anything goes kind of atmosphere. And we played, and they played, and they backed us up for some of our songs from CXI, and it was just
Nice.
truly magical. And we all stayed up at there's tons of hotels because it's like a big tourist place. So we all stayed in a hotel. It was off season and stuff, and we got to hear stories. I think you wrote about stories. We got to get to know these folks as friends and as colleagues, which I felt super lucky about, and just get to know some of their stories and the tribulations and challenges that they had gone through to make their music. Jatan was talking about how she toured with her baby. She had a baby, and Christian Death was touring.
Oh yeah, that's.
Yeah, and I felt
I
that
think there's
that
a
was just
photo of her on tour with her kid.
yes,
Yeah.
and that was amazing. I didn't. I mean, for me, I didn't even think that one could do that, but why not,
Mm,
So, but it was
yeah.
just super humbling, and also just kind of like a battery that recharges us because we're so
Yeah.
far from that. When we get a chance to work with
Yeah.
people, like it's so intense, like Cliff was saying, it's like a boot camp, and it's so I don't know. I'm just speaking for myself. I get terrified because I'm like, oh, what am I going to do? Am I going to mess it up? Is it going to suck? It's like, do I suck?
Mm.
And these people have done everything, and they've been on the biggest stages. But they never ever, come across like that. We're totally like on the level, and they're super creative. I mean, these people I feel have like a direct line to, you know, the gods and goddesses of
Mm,
goth and
mhm.
punk, and it's just so fun to see and special. So,
Well, I think that they really incorporate their their nature, and it just flows for them. I feel
Mm,
akin to that. I feel like we're at the point where we just do what we do, and it just comes natural. We don't have to like try to like do. We're not trying to like you know I don't know. We're not really trying to overdevelop anything. We're just doing it at this point. So we're kind of on autopilot. And if something new happens and we start kind of like getting into something that sounds different than what we did before, then that's just a natural progression. And we're not really going like, we need to do this or that or whatever. It's just we're just trying to be ourselves and express ourselves. And I feel really akin
mm.
to those folks there. I mean, there's so many great musicians out there. I mean, like I said, we're friends with the guys from Killing Joke, and there's so many great musicians over there in England and Europe and all that. And we were doing radio for a long time, and we were connecting with different people online. And so we did a compilation that was a benefit for one of the LGBTQ nonprofits here in Anchorage that supports the teens. So a lot of kids get thrown out. Their parents will throw them out, and then they'll be stuck until they'll have to prostitute themselves or get stuck on getting hooked on drugs and taken advantage of. And you really can't survive in Anchorage without being in shelters. Because it's you'll die in the street because it's so cold here. So we were like, well, who comes to our shows? Well, we're like, well, we want to give back to the community because those are the same kids who come to see us when we perform. So we're like, so we got all of our friends online, all of our goth community, our punk rock community, our death rock community, our industrial community, our weirdo people like make weirdo tracks. I mean, just all of our friends that make cool music. And we're like, hey, donate a track. We're actually going to do another compilation. But this one was called Rainbow Goth, and we put it out, and it's got like 55 tracks, and then it's like
Wow.
suggested donation for like $10 or whatever. And and just try to make some money for this organization that provides service for folks and people that are like othered, that are othered from the rest of the normal community, that may or may not have enough support and support the organizations that like go out of their way to help people and
yeah.
keep them on track and just all that kind of stuff. It's good. There's really like a great network. I mean, I love the internet because obviously we're talking right now over the internet. It's a pretty amazing. So I love it. We're so disconnected up in Alaska. Like the difference between we're in South Central Anchorage, right? Anchorage, Alaska is a big city,
Hmm.
but it's not really compared to like lower 48. It's we're so far away from the rest of the lower 48. For example, if you fly from Anchorage to Seattle, that's the distance from New York to LA. So if we were to fly, it's like
Wow.
going one way to New York from here is like
Wow.
it's like going round trip. Do you know what I mean? One way. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Uh,
I definitely love to do benefit shows and benefit comps, so we'll be doing another one. Yep. Go ahead.
yeah, very cool. That's beautiful. I love that you guys did that. That's incredible. That's one of my favorite. Those are my favorite moments of being part of. Well, I mean goth, but anything in general is when people can come together and do stuff like that. Um, but yeah, I was thinking when you were talking about making music, I forget sometimes that. William Faith lives in Chicago, and he's basically at every show or event that you could go to. So you see him around, and it's not like I talk to him all the time, but he's very personable and very kind and generous and friendly, and really a pleasure to interact with anytime I get the opportunity to. And because I see him so often now, every once in a while, I have that realization of, oh shit, this is a fucking legend. Like this guy that did all this incredible stuff, and he's just hanging out,
Uh-huh.
talking to people. It's so crazy.
I know. It's like you get starstruck. I got that in LA. I had a chance to meet Giza X, and I got a little a little
Mm,
starstruck on that too.
yeah.
I don't know how to say it. I just kind of get a little paralyzed. I'm like, oh my heart. But yeah, I had that, and then I just had to bust through that. I totally get that.
Yeah.
Yep. And people are so down to earth. Oh my goodness. It's so awesome. Yeah.
So a couple more questions here. I did want to ask about how, because I believe I've heard you talk about this before, but as someone who identifies as a neo-pagan themselves, and I have my own practices and rituals and things. I was interested to hear how that interacts or inserts itself into the music and art that you create for you.
For me, I was thinking about this. I remember just now you said about working with objects that have symbolic value and symbolic
Mm-hmm.
meaning to you, and how that kind of brings you in touch with direct energy within yourself.
Mm,
So I can identify with that totally. I was raised Catholic, and I went through all those sacraments and stuff. So I'm not Catholic now, but this is a religion that definitely believes that statues are alive and things like that.
yeah,
I mean, I
yeah.
went to Catholic school when I was young, all the way through high school. So I really got um, into the pageantry and the symbolic value of an object and how it looks and what it means and what its hand gestures are and things like that. So that type of thing
Mm,
completely informed like a paganistic view. So you just kind of flip that and you switch it, and it definitely informs our art in terms of archetypes. There's like archetypes that occur within our music and art where we have contrasts of the sweet sounding things with completely noise slash grind sounding things together, or maybe not so many shades of difference, but we can tap into those things and bring in a little bit difference, or we'll have like a bridge or a different part that's for me, it's the same thing. It's just working with duality, working with polarity, and that brings
mm,
in the energy just like you would with a ritual is just a contained, intention around that, with
mm-hmm,
maybe using some objects that touch your heart or whatever, so that it's easier for you to bring it out. And I certainly have a ton of experience praying. Oh my God, like rosaries
mm,
and everything. I mean, those
mm-hmm,
things are they're in me, not literally with that, this particular religion, but in my own choices for my current spirituality stuff. I feel like we kind of present that, just in the fact
mm,
that it's the two of us and that's all there is. And, you know, I just hope that people would come along that journey with me and, listen to our songs and feel that empowered and go forth with their own thing. A lot of reason for that is behind the masks that we use. We try to make iconic like archetypes occur in front of us with the masks. We have a shadow mask of a wolf and a raven. We give them out to the audience, And when people get the masks, all of a sudden, they change. They hold it up in front of their face and they start to act like an animal and they go crazy. And so that's something that we try to give to people as like a ritual, like change into something that's free or whatever, whatever it is for you. So
Yeah.
what about you, Cliff?
Well, like embody those spirits, I feel like, everyone's kind of like, everybody wants to howl. Everyone wants to call, call, it's fun, so have a good time. That's part of it. It's having a good time. And we like to have fun. And also, we like to connect with those, with powerful energies that we feel like, we live in Alaska. It's really like nature, like times 100 here. It's like, you go 10 miles outside of the city, you're in the middle of nowhere. It's like country. It's like really a lot of country here. So that amplified, we definitely, there's a lot of energy going on here as far as that goes. And me personally, I feel like my connection with all that is like I come from maybe like an ancestral kind of pagan Celtic kind of background. Also Native American. I'm part Native American. So as far as like religion goes, I don't like have a particular religion, but I definitely I like embody and always think of like natural, mystical, like kind of mantras, and I always feel like that is something that just is there. You can either accept it or not, and it's up to you. You can you know believe in magic or not. It's up to you. If you want to live that life and you want to believe what you want to believe, then you can. You don't have to have a religion to say that it's okay to think a certain way or whatever. You can have your own imagination and believe in things you like, and it's okay.
Yeah. The earth energy here is so strong. And the animals, like, we're so funny. We'll see different animals and we'll say, that's an omen. That's an omen,
Oh yeah,
We see so many different
I see
animals.
lots
Yeah.
of omens. I definitely believe that. I mean, one time I really connected with a moose's connection. I had a connection with a moose, and I had I want to say psychic. I had a psychic moment where I really felt like I was going to see a moose, and it was weird because I don't usually have it, but it was like really intense. Um, and I've had it a couple times, but this was the most intense. And so I was driving out, and then I drove like a mile away, and there was literally like a moose running in front of my car, like galloping down the street, like in the middle of the city, and it was just one of those things, like, like, uh, you know, there it is, you just thought of it, and then there it is, and so that was one time I really connected with it. I think the moose was scared. I think that's why I was picking up on the moose so intently, because its psyche was like sending out like, hey, I'm in the middle of the city, help, whatever. But we have like 1,000 moose like in the city, like during the wintertime. There's like, and there's ravens all over the place. And so, I mean, those things are great, and the northern lights, when you get outside the city lights, you can see those, the aurora borealis and everything. So it's real beautiful. It's very isolated, like the scene, like the music scene's isolated, but there's definitely, we're kind of akin to Iceland and the Nordic countries, the northern countries. And we just met with the drummer from the Sugar Cubes in KUKL. He was up here doing a talk, and we got to meet him. He was so super nice.
Yeah, there's a local music agency that tries to help develop music here, and they're using Iceland as a model, and it's called Akimi, but they're super great. So they had him come, and they do a local music festival around their organization.
Yeah, Siggy.
Yeah.
Siggy. It was really nice.
Interesting.
Very cool.
Cool. Yeah, actually, it was Ivy. One of the things you said about growing up Catholic just kind of reminded me about how there are cultures and communities where it's essentially Catholicism, but a lot of the people that are participating in the local church are still doing a lot of these practices that could be considered witchcraft, but the sort of the parish and the people involved in the church management just kind of overlook that stuff because it's just part of the culture, whereas it might not necessarily be part of Catholic theology. But it's just interesting to see how that stuff kind of all crosses over and blends together.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. Cool.
So then my last question here, before we close out and hear where we can find all your music again, is and I wrote this down, I think, in the notes I sent you, but if this isn't something you want to talk about, that's totally cool. We can just close out. But it was on my mind because I heard you bring this up in another interview, and I did have two friends at my job whose parents died in the last, as in the last 3 months. My boss and then my friend who works with me, and I've been watching them deal with that in their own way and kind of talking to them as they go through that. And this idea of it's kind of a perennial topic on the show, and we revisit this every year with a different guest. But this idea of does being in the goth community, which is generally seen as kind of thinking about or dealing with death and dying and mortality, did that have any preparative or therapeutic effect on actually dealing with loss of loved ones in real life?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I don't mind talking about it at all. I mean, I've put up on Facebook, about the fact that I lost both parents a month apart from each other.
Mm.
And my mom passed this last April, and my father in May. And you know, I think that being within the goth community and listening to this music, I think it has been somewhat of a comfort to me in terms of, it's okay to talk about death. There are people who are very open about it. There's different ways to
Mm.
think about it. When you talk to somebody and you bring up what happened, they don't kind of like recoil and go away like, "Oh my God, I can't talk to you at all," uh,
Mm.
that type of thing. So there's like a lot less fear around it. So in that sense, it has helped. And I appreciate that very much. I definitely do. But it's it's been hard. It's not been the easiest
Yeah.
journey, and it's not that way for anybody. Everybody's is different. Um, but I know, of course my mom knew all about me, before she passed. She knew everything I did and was like super supportive. She did have Alzheimer's, so I kind of lost her, a couple years ago, sort of. I would just say, you know, being in this community has just been great for me for that for that reason. Just feeling more open about it. Um and I mean I don't I wish I could say that there's an afterlife. I think that I have, seen or heard a few symbolic things that have come to me, about my parents, but then sometimes I doubt myself and I'm like, well, that's just because, you're making it up or something like that. But again, you can talk about that stuff. You can make a song about that stuff. People are cool about it. We were finishing Death Mask Devotion at the same time that my mother suddenly passed, and I ended up doing the vocals for that like within hours of her
Wow.
passing, and it was really great for me, but also I didn't really know like whether I should be embarrassed or whether I should be like wow, that was great that I did that. I wasn't really sure what to think about that, but we sent it in to Paul and he was like, "You know what? Sometimes all you can do is sing." So I was happy.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean it's just been great. The people that I've known who've been friends have definitely been welcoming to, talk about real emotions and,
Yeah.
not shy away from it. So I definitely
Yeah.
appreciate that. Absolutely.
Yeah. I'm really happy to hear that. There is an aversion to, because as I've been talking with, not just in this situation, but throughout my life with people who have had people close to them die, um, you get the here's a card when you come back to work,
Right.
and don't talk about it again. We don't want to have to deal with that. But
Yeah.
that's not how life works. That's not how grieving works. That's not how that stuff
Well, it's
Sometimes
illogical.
works.
it
So
takes a long time. Sometimes so it takes years. Sometimes you just really like are you're just feeling it for years. Um, my father passed away years ago, and I'm still dealing with it. I don't think you really ever get over that. You know, I I
Yeah.
had a dog. I had a dog that died when I was like 13. On Halloween, it got run over by a truck right in front of us, and we were like, we were out trick or treating, and then the dog just got, you know, dead, like right in front of you, and it was just like the worst. I cried for that dog worse than any person I ever knew. I
yeah,
just it tore me up. So after that, I kind of was like, well, life is short. You just really have to love people when you're there with them, and really
yeah,
appreciate what you got. And you really have to see what if you love somebody, then let them know, because that's not y- I mean,
yeah,
you're here. I do believe that we're like there's another like dimension that people's energy goes to, and that you can communicate with that dimension and all that. I do believe in that. So I don't think that you'll never hear from those people again, or those spirits, or like. But I think if you have those memories, and you have the energy, the good memories and all that, um, that you'll always have that, and then in that way, that those people, their spirit is still alive inside you. So
mm,
Yeah, one of the weird things about this experience has been for me, sometimes I feel like people who, just your average person out in the community, they kind of smell the sadness in you. They
mm,
can, it's
mm-hmm,
kind of like blood in the water to them. So they're they're just nasty for no reason, and they know on some level, they know something has happened to you and they're not comfortable with it. And I just feel like there's something that you project and I can't help it. Like I can't really put a curtain around it. But when I'm with
yeah,
people I trust and I know through music and, family and stuff, it's totally safe. So I feel safer with that community. I truly haven't felt safe out in the world when I'm like just full of these emotions. I think people can see it or somehow they know, and they just do
well,
like unkind stuff. It's weird.
yeah. I think there's this toxic belief that, and I think this has come up in every job I've had. Just talking about work again, this idea that you should be able to, and this is probably a capitalist ideal, but this idea that you should be able to come to work and put aside your personal problems and do your job and be just be this worker at work. But you can't. y- your life experiences and your emotions are all a conglomerate of who you are and where you are in the world, and it's constantly shifting and evolving and being created, and you can't just neatly create these little boxes of being this person here and this person there. And but people like to pretend that you can be, and when they're confronted with that reality of other people existing in a this cohesive way, that it's scary to them because it kind of shatters this way of viewing the world
Right. It
and
breaks
brings
their
this
jar.
reality. Yeah.
well, I mean,
Yeah.
people are always going through like a level of healing, and self-healing, and there's a lot of that going on. I mean, people are, have a hard time in life, and not everybody has it easy. So, I mean, you grew up in New York or New Jersey or Philly or whatever. That's a rough. I mean, that could be really rough. So, I mean, we had a hard time with that, and it depends. I mean, wherever you grow up in the hood, or you grow up in wherever. Some people, they have a hard time with all kinds of stuff, and you just kind of, you know, take care of yourself, and
Mm.
take care of your friends and people you love, and get through this crazy life thing. And I
Yeah.
don't know,
Yeah.
what I mean.
Jobs are weird.
Yeah,
Yeah.
jobs are
Jobs
weird.
are
Yeah.
weird like
They
that.
expect you to put on that mask and go in there, and
Yeah.
Yeah.
so
Yeah, here's 5 days of bereavement leave time, and
Yeah.
we expect you to come back next week and be fine.
Right.
Like, what?
yeah.
Yeah. It doesn't
Yeah,
work like that at
no,
all. Not at all. Yeah, it's definitely, I definitely appreciate the scene overall, and everybody been able to create, and everyone who's appreciated us. We're like I always say, we're like a small band from the biggest state, but we're like the only band here with only goth artist here in Alaska. So,
There is
it's
death metal.
yeah, there's
There are
death
some death
metal.
metal bands.
Hmm.
But back in the '90s, there were
I,
some industrial kind of like dark wave bands, which are cool, and there was some bands like that up here. But currently, there's no goth bands, and we're like for years now, we're like the only goth band in the whole state. I mean, Alaska is like 1/3 the size of the United States, So hey, we're holding that title down.
very cool. Yeah, I would think there, being in the frozen, desolate north, that there would be some kind of metal scene up
There
there.
is,
Yeah,
yeah.
there is.
We're in like the burgeoning Alaskan horror film scene too, because we actually just
Yeah.
did some music.
Ooh.
We did some music for a new horror flick called. That's kind of campy. Do you want to tell them about it?
Sure. It's called Vampire Foxes from Space. Is that right, Cliff?
Oh,
Yeah.
that sounds.
Yeah,
I'm already sold.
yeah, so it's awesome. It's a little bit campy, and it's very much horror. It's very DIY. But the
Yeah.
gentleman who made the film, he reached out to us to make some music for it, and he wanted us to do like the horror type music. So that was another one of those assignments. We were like, oh yeah, this is going to be really cool. So it's going to go to Oregon Scream Week, horror film festival, and then after that it'll hopefully go to some other festivals, and maybe he'll get a chance to make a full length. But it was a super awesome opportunity, for us to make some soundtrack music. So that, yeah, there is a horror film. There's a film scene here, and it's a horror film scene here. There's been theater with theater the theater scene too. We've been able to do some, I guess you want to call it, soundtrack for a live performance.
Well, we
In,
did original music
Mm.
for the Macbeth. We did
yeah.
Oh, wow.
yeah, we did the music for their like local theater performance of Macbeth. They used some of our actual like rock music, but then we made up original score kind of, which was cool.
So, yeah, so the elements of the story, like the dagger appears and things like that, we would have all these different, themes that would come in, and sounds that would come in. They put it together with not to say a slideshow, but visuals, like they
You
would
can hear it
project things.
on our Bandcamp. We actually released
Yeah.
we actually have an album of that. You can hear it. So
Yeah.
it's a Cliff and Ivy doing Macbeth
Music from
music.
Macbeth. But they're like, we need somebody to do something really interesting for this super modern adaptation of Macbeth. Let's call Cliff and Ivy. They'll do it,
Very cool. Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
there it is. I missed that one somehow. Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
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 Very cool. Yeah, I love the in high school I watched a lot of those kind of low budget, campy, schlocky kind of horror films, and I love
Me
that
too.
shit. So
Me too.
that's cool. Yeah, yeah. All right, well, let's wrap it up here. Remind, if you don't mind, remind everyone where we can find you on Bandcamp and Facebook and all the, your website, everywhere that you want to send people.
Yeah, we are cliffandivy.com, and there's all of our different websites, on Bandcamp and Reverb Nation and all that. CD Baby, you can get our stuff at,
Yeah.
Also, we're performing too. You want to tell them the shows that we got coming up or no?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. Of course, everything in the websites is going to be Cliff and Ivy, cliffandivy.bandcamp.com, facebook.com/Cliff and Ivy. And of course, cliffandivy.com has everything, all the links to those things in it. We're Twitter at Cliff and Ivy. It's just real easy for us to find us. Also on Instagram, same thing. We have shows coming up on the East Coast. We're really super honored and psyched to play Dark Side of the Con 4, which is like
It's
one of our,
Parsippany, New Jersey. Yeah.
yeah, it's at the Sheraton there, but Dark Side of the Con is huge. So we're so psyched to be able to play that. And
That's like March 27, 28, 29. And we're not
right.
sure what day we're performing, but we'll be there.
Yeah, and then we're gonna play at Otto's Shrunken Head in New York City. That's like
on March 24th at 8 p.m. We're playing early on that day.
early show.
It's a Tuesday in New York, so whatever.
But that's goth night at the Shrunken Head. It's a
Otto's
tiki
Shrunken
bar.
Head. Yeah.
Yeah, and we're playing at the Man Cave, the record store.
Randy Now's Man Cave in Bordentown, New Jersey, on March 26th at 7 p.m.
And we're working out some other dates for Virginia and Baltimore, maybe. So we'll
Maybe
see.
DC.
Maybe
Not sure.
DC.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that will be it. I mean, because we do, maybe our tours are 2 weeks at the most because of the care for our now young adult
Right.
children. So we have to have 24-hour staffing basically for them for the entire time. And it's a big challenge
Mhm.
for the agency to put together. And so we, need people to hold it down here while we're out there doing that. And it's just worked out best to have the shorter tours. But, hopefully we'll be able to have maybe other different arrangements occur and could, go for longer
Well,
someday.
we this is all we do all this ourselves. We have our own record label and everything, so we're really like DIY.
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
if a bigger label wants to step up and help us with some tour support and all that, that'd be great. But right now we're just doing it ourselves. So.
Very DIY. Yep. Every single date, reaching out and introducing ourselves in some cases, or finding the person who can be the ambassador, of the Alaskan Goth
Yeah.
band. I mean, some places don't even think we're real, like, are you really going to show up? That kind of thing.
Mm.
And it's just always challenging to arrange things on the East Coast because of the time difference. By the time people get the message, we just woke up, but they're already doing lunch, that kind of thing.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it's just interesting. Yeah.
Well,
But
and it's totally admirable. When punk and goth were coming out in the 70s and 80s, DIY was kind of a necessity, but it's a lot harder to do that now in 2020. So, it's definitely admirable. I wanted to ask, so it's cliffandivy.com, and I don't know if you still have this up and running, but I feel like at one point I saw a fundraiser for a tour, and I wanted to throw some money your way, but I haven't been able to find it again. I don't know if that's still
yeah,
Oh
a
yeah.
it's a
thing.
GoFundMe right now. It's GoFundMe. We'll put up links on it's Cliff and Ivy Wing It East GoFundMe. Um yeah, so we've had a few people.
Oh, I found it. Okay, here it
Yeah,
is.
there's been a few people donate, which we're completely blown away. I'm like, oh my God, people are helping us. And we did do, you know, I try to set aside time and do extra work in order to save money for tour, because that's how you do it. And so we're just
Yeah.
looking for a little bit to to add to what we already have in order to make it back east. And I'm totally honored that the people would give us money. And I got this idea the other day, or actually Cliff gave me the idea, to offer this artwork for for donation. um, I have an art background. That's what my undergrad college was for. So I did a pet portrait. So if anybody wants a pet portrait, I'd be happy to do a pet portrait for
I
donation.
think I really fell in love with Ivy when she was going to art school in New Jersey, and I saw her artwork, and I just really fell in love with her and her ability, because she's a really gifted artist, and she would make these huge canvases, just really beautiful, majestic looking images that were like gory and magical and just all
Mm.
kinds of just really dark imagery, but it was really beautiful and well done. And she had New York artists were her teachers, and so she'd have these like really great critiques of her work. And I was just honored to know someone who was like that gifted. So I love that about her.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Cool. And I will have all of that linked in the show notes as well. So,
Okay. Awesome.
Ivy, Cliff, thank you both so much for taking the time to chat with us. It was a lovely time.
Oh, thank you
Thank
so much.
you.
Cliff, Ivy, thank you again so much for taking the time to hang out with us. I know this episode has now come and gone, but if you happen to miss it, this was actually our 100th episode of Cemetery Confessions, which adds up to just over 6 years of producing this show. My goal when starting this podcast was twofold. I wanted to create content that I personally wanted to hear but wasn't finding. Content that was dynamic and informed and discursive. And I wanted to promote and give platform to the diverse and creative voices in our community. In fact, actually, to that second part, I should mention that we've just added a new podcast to the Belfry Network, which is called Sounds and Shadows. They're a fairly new podcast, but they've already put out interviews with a slew of goth bands like Twin Tribes and Witch Hands. They have a really interesting format where they bring these bands on to talk about other music, and it's actually a lot of fun. So I recommend checking it out. You can listen to it on the Belfry Network, which you can subscribe to through any podcast app. Or you can head over to the website, thebelfry.rip, or go to soundsandshadows.com. The true joy of creating this podcast has come from the friendships that I've made. As I kind of think over the last 6 years, I'm not really one to look back. Personally, I am much more into considering and reflecting on the here and now and looking forward to how I can improve. But part of knowing how you can become a better person is considering the past. And I think the true joy of creating this podcast has come from the friendships that I've made, real, meaningful connections that have sprouted from this gray, fog-laden virtual graveyard that we've cultivated. As cheesy as it sounds, having you along with me on this journey has brought me inner strength and peace and self-discovery in ways that I really never expected. You've given me a purpose and a way to give back to this community that has meant so much to me for most of my life. Of course, my dearest, deepest thanks to everyone who supports us on Patreon. I'm going to thank you by name in a second here, but I should also mention that we will be back in 2 weeks. We're going to keep going, keep making as good of content as we can. The next episode will feature the creator and founder of Nightbreed Recordings over in the UK. He's also a musician and a promoter. He's dipped his toes into social media and running all kinds of things that support the scene and the community. So I'm really excited to walk through the history of goth from his perspective and see where it stands today. So for January 2020, at the founders level, we have Esmeralda, Abigail, SJ, Cadaver Kelly, Junkyard Bat, and Samantha. Thank you all from the bottom of my heart. At the Nocturnal Council level, we have Christine, Trey, Nephilim Incorruptus, Michelle, Natalie, DJ Azzy, Mike Mess, Dawn, Fifth Dream, Amy, William, Eternal Winter, Sav, Skullgirdle, Jen, Sebastian, Esther, Hayshaker, and Paul. And I should mention, if you do want to hang out with these people, most of them, and myself, head over to Patreon. At the lowest level, that will get you access to our Discord. You can jump in there, have a chat with us. You'll also get early access to the normal episodes. You'll get them about a week early. And if you go up, obviously, you can get other bonuses. And then at the Crow's Call level, we have Isabel, Dom, Marco, Angel, Alex, Anne, Heather, Marissa, Becca, David, Alex, Kelly, Dagger Dance, Caroline, Alana, Irene, Susan, Kay, Mark, King Rhinex, Jonathan, Wolfie, David, Morgan, Kevin, Ryan, Top Down Tom, Eduardo, Jan, Richard, Gindalis, Isabel, Captain Faust, Elizabeth, Jennifer, Kevin, Bruce, Enya, Felina, Keen, Anna, Death Metal Kumbaya, Laurel, the Ghost Pony, Ava, Stuart, Nia, Martin, Myron, Draishi, Gateway Goth Events, Morgan, Cher, and GPS. That's going to do it for our show. If you stick around to the end here, you know that I'm not one for long-winded diatribes or sitting around talking to myself. That's what the Patreon exclusive videos are for. You'll get a lot of me sitting around talking to myself. But if you have listened this far, that makes you special. That makes you one of the super fans. So I appreciate it. I appreciate you taking the time to hang out, listen. It's easy for me to kind of get caught up in the, who am I talking to? What am I talking about? When are we scheduling the episodes? What research am I doing? Editing, what's coming up next? And not really stop and think about how special it is to have you here with me. Because that's really why I started this, was to go through this, to have these conversations with you. And it really means the world to me that you've taken the time out of your day to do this together, to spend this time together. And it is truly wonderful to know that you're here. That's all for now. Thanks for hanging out. We'll see you in 2 weeks. So until next time, stay dark.
The preceding program is a member of The Belfry, a network of blogs, podcasts, and videos for the darkly inclined. Go to thebelfry.rip for more information.